What's up, guys? I'm BTC. Roadhog is getting a new ability, and Jeff Kaplan talks about the new experimental mode and the new role queue system with 1 tank, 3 DPS, and 2 support. So almost immediately after I released my last video, Blizzard updated again and gave us a bunch more information. So here we go. So first of all, what was the idea behind the experimental mode? And Jeff Kaplan says that when they make balance changes, they have to go to the PTR, which is the public test realm. And while they're on the PTR, we're also going through console certification process for Sony, Microsoft, and now Nintendo. On average, it takes a week. I know some people kept saying that, oh, you can go through the certification process in a couple of hours. No, that's not true. Whenever Blizzard wants to update a patch on the consoles, right here, Jeff Kaplan is saying it takes them a week to do it, which is why they don't have PTR on console. And that doesn't include any of the testing or deploying, so it takes a long process to change the damage of McCree's attack by 1 point. Takes longer than players think. Then from a balancing standpoint, we also want to live with those changes for a while when making our next round. So it ended up putting us on a bi-monthly balance schedule just by the nature of the process. If you ask any designer on the Overwatch team, what are the top 10 features that they want? One of the things that they would say is the ability to immediately change things and be more responsive to balance requests. So follows up with, when did the opportunity to create the new experimental mode arise? And he says there were 2 engineers that were most proactive in the experimental idea. One was Derek, and he's an engineer, and the other is Phil Orrick, our mastermind network engineer. Derek proposed the idea of, hey, let's imagine if we had a version of the PTR in the game that everyone could play, and this excited us because players wouldn't have to download a separate client. All of our reward systems, like leveling your account and earning loot boxes, would still work. Plus, console players could be a part of it for the first time. It was one of the easiest design decisions ever. It never works this way. When someone has an idea, everyone else is like, oh, that's absolutely what we should do. But that's pretty much how it happened with the experimental mode. And the first change that everyone will be testing is the triple damage, which is the 1 tank, 3 damage, 2 support, team comp, that new role queue system. And so someone else chimes in and says, when we roll out to the role queue system with the 2 damage, 2 support, 2 tank players to team, we ended up with a lot more damage players in the queue than tanks and supports. This created longer queue times, and one of the things we considered was, what if we try to make team composition closer to the actual ratio of players by role? If that did work out, then people waiting would be less, playing more, so it behooved us to actually try it. I do want to just kind of throw in something here, that one of the reasons why people want to play DPS and not the tank and support roles is because they want to pew pew pew, because they want to get those eliminations. I've said this again and again and again. A lot of people simply do not find the tank and the support roles to be fun. Because of this, they don't want to play them. And while, you know, changing the role queue system might help alleviate some of the queue times, it doesn't fundamentally solve the problem that most players find playing tank and support to not be an enjoyable experience. And Blizzard needs to try to make changes that make it more fun for these other roles. Like, this is number one thing that should be happening. They should be looking at that and reevaluating how the game works if the majority of your player base just doesn't want to play not 1 but 2 of the roles that are in, you know, your 3-role system, right? So anyways, continuing on, he says, how did the internal playtest go? Any interesting observations? And Heiberg says, when you start having more damage and fewer tanks, the amount of lethality in the game changes. The amount of pressure on people playing tanks and the people trying to keep the tanks alive changes. Then Jeff Kaplan says, with 3 damage players, it opened team compositions that weren't really seeing in the current game. We've seen compositions with 2 flanking characters like Genji and Tracer supported by aggressive tanks. We've also seen compositions with 2 snipers like Widow and Hanzo with a more defensive play style. Now you end up with 2 snipers but also have a flanker, so the game really plays differently like it's a lot more chaotic, a lot more action-based. It polarized the dev team. People tended to either hate it or be intrigued by it. Most people were cautiously optimistic, like, oh, hey, this could be interesting. But then we had people staunchly opposed to it who said, this is so different, it puts too much pressure on the tank player, and the game feels too lethal. So that's one of the things about Overwatch. The TTK, the time to kill for characters, is way, way, way higher than it is in other games like CSGO and of that similar nature, where, you know, you can take someone out with literally just one hit. And I know you can do that in Overwatch with like a Widow or a Hanzo, but we're talking about every character being able to take out someone else in just one hit. And that's how fast that's how low the TTK is for other games. But for Overwatch, you've got barriers, you've got defense matrices, you've got healing, all that sort of stuff. And it just keeps drastically increasing the TTK. I mean, some tank players can survive for 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute or longer in a massive fight and never get taken out just because of the amount of damage resistance and healing and all that sort of stuff. So he says, we're running the experiment to see if we can balance our way out of those issues. Like with the game feeling too lethal, certainly the number of tanks that are present can be the influencing factor, but we could just as easily look at everyone's damage and hit points and make adjustments there. And they said, you know, can you talk about some specific changes? He says, the biggest question was, what happens to Roadhog, D.Va, and Zarya? And I would also throw in Sigma and Orisa to that, because, I mean, they've been nerfed so many times, you can't. You're not going to be able to run an Orisa or a Sigma by yourself. I mean, you run Sigma by yourself and you're just going to get absolutely steamrolled. Same thing with Orisa. Like, they've just been nerfed too much because of the double barrier stuff. When you were trying to operate under the double barrier, then yes, you could use both characters and they were both very powerful, but if you're just running one of them, I mean, they're gonna be just as bad as the Roadhog, D.Va, or the Zarya was. So I don't know if they're gonna make changes there. I hope they do, because, I mean, they're just not gonna be viable. Anyways, so he says, when we created our tanks, we didn't think of them as off tanks. In fact, we had anticipated people playing with only one tank. That's how much of early Overwatch was played. If you ever jumped into quick play before role queue, you know that having one tank was a luxury. Yeah, that's definitely true. But the way players settled into 2-2-2, Zarya, D.Va, and Roadhog are exclusively considered off tanks. And again, so isn't Sigma is considered an off tank. As part of this experiment, we've retuned those three to be main tanks, including giving Roadhog a new ability. Now when he uses Take a Breather, he gets a gas cloud around him and mitigates damage for everyone in the area and heals him. And all those changes will be in the experimental mode, not just, you know, the change of roles. He says some heroes will be completely rebalanced, but those changes only pertain to triple damage. If we stay with 2-2-2, we're just going to jettison those changes. And he says that the new version of Roadhog that they have for this new experimental mode would be broken in 2-2-2. I completely disagree. I mean, I haven't seen what it completely does, but if it only added that one ability, then no, that's not the case at all. Roadhog is considered to be one of the worst characters in the game, particularly for tanks, because, I mean, he's just an ult battery. Like, that's all he does. Anyways, next he says, you know, Jeff Kaplan says Roadhog, the new version of Roadhog, would be in every match, maybe. How do you hope that triple damage will affect the average Overwatch player? He said, this is new territory for us. When we put stuff on the PTR, those are typically changes we've confident in, likely to push live. This is more like us sharing an experiment with our 50 million closest friends. I do have to point out something. Overwatch does not have 50 million players, okay? Credit to Jeff Kaplan for trying this one. This is not true at all. Overwatch does not have 50 million players. This is a trick it's a kind of a gimmick that Blizzard does. In fairness, other game companies do the same thing. What they do is whenever they talk about the number of players they have, whenever Overwatch is advertised, whenever World of Warcraft is advertised, any of these games, whenever they advertise it, whenever they talk about the player base, they always give the number of people that have purchased the game. They don't talk about concurrent players, okay? So concurrent players is however many people are willing to play the game any day of the week, right? Like right now. You might have 50 million people who bought the game, but there's about 45 million, maybe even more, that don't play it anymore. Like, they bought it, they tried it, and then they either didn't like it or they moved on to something else. Maybe they're playing Fortnite now. Maybe they're playing Apex Legends. Maybe they're playing something else. But there is not, and I want to be absolutely clear on this, there is not 50 million people currently playing Overwatch. No. No. That's not even close. Like, not even remotely close. Credit to Jeff Kaplan. He's trying that. It's a marketing trick. Credit to him on that one. No. That's no. So anyways, continuing, he says, we'll be looking at two things, player feedback and gut feelings. That's super valuable to us. And the second is the effect on queue times. The goal here is not to change the meta, it's to reduce queue times. After triple damage, are there any upcoming changes? He says, after triple damage, we'll focus on balance changes in experimental, at least until we can cook up our next wacky experiment. So after this goes off, it's probably just going to be like minor, damage, cooldown changes and stuff, just minor balance changes that they'll probably be putting. So rather than having it go on the PTR, normal PTR, they'll just, those little changes that they've been making to characters like May and to Orisa and to some of the others, they're just going to put them in the experimental mode. So he says, what are some of the reasons you feel players queue up for damage more often than tanks? He says, maybe we'll see it answered. He says, there are a lot of different reasons. One is simply that there are more damage heroes to choose from than tanks right now. Partially true, yeah. Also, I think the reward mechanisms in the game are skewed towards damage. If you think all about the visceral feedback you get from a kill, we light up the kill feed, you get an elimination mission, that's very satisfying sound. We don't quite do the same level of diligence when it comes to things like how much damage you block, or if you save someone from dying by healing them at the right time, and that's on us. That's something we need to fix over time. Good, at least he admits it, and they're willing to try to fix it. Let's see what they do, though. That said, there's a lot to be attracted into in the tank role. Right? Hammond is one of the most skillful and creative heroes in the game. The diversity in playstyles, if you look at Ryan versus Sigma versus Orisa, none of them play the same, even though they're all barrier tanks. I think they're unique and fun to play, but I think few players feel they're up to the task of playing a tank. It's high pressure position, and the team counts on you. And then they ask, is one of the goals to get more people to play tank? He says, not necessarily. This is how we've been thinking about it. Imagine that we're an ice cream store and we have 3 flavors of ice cream, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, and you have to line up for all 3 flavors separately. So imagine the ice cream line is way, way longer than the chocolate or strawberry line. I feel it's the wrong philosophy to ask, what can we do to convince the vanilla players to like strawberry more? It makes more sense to say, we need more vanilla ice cream. While that's kind of true, again, I think you need to address the issues of why people don't like the other ones, right? If the vast majority of your player base doesn't like 2 of your flavors, then there is something fundamentally wrong with that strategy, and you need to address it. But there you go. So Roadhog getting the new AoE, and again, I think Orisa and Sigma are just going to get absolutely steamrolled. If you're running one of them as the only tank, then nah, you're just going to get rolled over. It's just going to be so unbelievably easy to destroy Orisa's barrier and then just plow through them. Particularly, I mean, if you have 3 DPS, then the barrier is going to go down even faster, right? So, like, if the barrier is a tissue paper now, and you have 3 DPS attacking the barrier instead of just 2, then it's gonna get destroyed even faster. So I don't really know what they're gonna do. I'd like to see what changes they're making for Zarya and D.Va. I guess we'll have to wait and see. My guess is that they're probably not gonna give them new abilities. They're probably just gonna buff the existing mechanics that the characters have. Like, maybe they'll just give D.Va more armor, more total time on the defense matrix, that sort of deal. For Zarya, I mean, they could just increase her health and then reduce the cooldowns on the bubbles, maybe increase the duration a little bit, increase the amount of damage that gets absorbed. There's lots of stuff that you could do with with Zarya. I think that would probably be the easier ones. Roadhog and D.Va need a little bit more work, and again, Orisa and Sigma definitely going to need some changes too, otherwise they're just going to get crushed. So there you go, guys. We have the answer for Roadhog, at least getting a new ability What do you guys think about the new role queue system that is going to be tried out on the experimental mode, which is 1 tank, 3 DPS, and 2 support? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can get some cool gear, join my Discord server, or follow me on social media with the links down in the description below. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, and remember, always blame the controller because it's never your fault.